The voices of brave soldiers facing certain doom rang out over the open sea. Their ship was sinking, yet they found the courage within themselves to sing as they worked to save others around them. Explosions and the creaking and groaning of their vessel filling with water made their song more ominous, their powerful voices carrying over the Mediterranean. This small act of valor was just one moment in the heroism shown during the sinking of HMT Aragon. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. HMT Aragon wasn't always a Royal Navy ship, and she was first built for her first owners, Royal Mail Steam Packet Company. Before we really dive into her, we need to know why she came about because there's actually a really interesting reasoning behind her building. Owen Phillips became chairman of RMSP in 1903, and quickly, he addressed the company's need for larger ships on its South America route. So, RMSP ordered Aragon from Harland & Wolff, and they built Aragon on slip number 7 of its South Yard in Belfast as yard number 367. She was launched and christened by Countess Fitzwilliam on February 23, 1905, and she was completed on June 22, 1905. Before we move further into Aragon's history, let's look at her specs. Aragon, named after the Spanish Kingdom of Aragon, was an RMSP A-series ocean liner with her tonnages sitting at 9,588 gross registered tons and 6,038 net tons. She was 513.2 feet long, had a beam of 60.4 feet wide, and a depth of 31 feet deep. As an ocean liner, she could carry 306 first class, 66 second class, and 632 third class passengers. She was registered in Belfast, and her UK official number was 120707. Her code letters were HCST, and her call sign was MBN. She had a large single funnel amidships, as well as 12 lifeboats on her boat deck, plus a dinghy and gig aft. Her first-class dining saloon had a paneled ceiling inlaid with paintings of Christopher Columbus discovering the Americas. She had 4 sister ships: Amazon, Avon, Aragon, and Asturias. Let's look at her cargo capacity. She had 5 cargo holds, some of which were refrigerated to carry meat and fruit from South America. The number 5 hold and lower levels of numbers 1 and 2 holds were for frozen cargoes. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean a caseload of Ben & Jerry's, but it was still useful. The tween decks of numbers 1 and 2 holds and upper tween deck of number 5 hold were for chilled cargoes that are not frozen. A steam-powered refrigerating plant used, quote, carbonic anhydride as the refrigerant, and the holds were insulated with, quote, silicate cotton. Her bunkers held 2,000 tons of coal, and she had water tanks with a capacity of around 2,000 tons. Now, let's look at her propulsion. Owen Phillips had discussed with Charles Parsons, father of the Parsons steam turbine, the possibility of steam turbine propulsion, which had been demonstrated by the steamer launched in 1894, Turbinia. The first turbine-powered passenger ship, T.S. King Edward, had entered service on the Firth of Clyde in 1901, but Phillips decided that another year of evaluation was needed to establish if and how to apply the new form of steam power to commercial ships. This was a huge turning point in the innovation of ships, so it's natural to have hesitation. So, Aragon was built with a pair of conventional quadruple expansion steam engines. Their combined power is variously quoted at 762, 827, or 875 nominal horsepower. They turned 2 screws, which gave her an average speed of 15 to 16 knots. Aragon was followed by a series of generally similar but progressively larger and heavier liners, which were her 4 sisters we mentioned earlier. In 1906, Harland & Wolff built Amazon and Avon, while another Belfast shipyard, Workman Clark & Company, built Aragon. Harland & Wolff added the 5th sister ship, Asturias, in 1908. RMSP named all of these ships with names starting with A, so this is why they were called the A-series or A-liners. A few years later, the final 4 A-series ships followed from Harland & Wolff. Arlanza was built in 1912, Andes and Alcantara were built in 1913, and Almanzora was built in 1915. Apart from being even larger, they were different from Aragon and her four sisters in that they had 3 screws instead of 2, and they made limited usage of the turbine propulsion that Phillips and Parsons had discussed when building Aragon. Their 2 outer screws were driven by conventional triple expansion steam engines, and a low-pressure steam turbine drove the middle screw via reduction gearing. Aragon was just the beginning of her class. And sitting on your wallet can be the beginning of back pain. Do you find yourself sitting on a chunky wallet in your back pocket, causing hip and back pain? And ladies, is your wallet so fat you have to have a purse for it? Well, look no further. Ridge wallets are flat and sleek so they fit in your front pocket, protecting your posture and saving you from back pain. Not only this, but they are made from incredibly strong carbon steel and come in a variety of gorgeous colors, including your favorite NFL football team's livery and customization options. Not only this, but Ridge wallets have RFID blocking technology to prevent electronic pickpocketing and credit card theft. My husband is so jealous of my Ridge wallet, he's begging for one for Christmas. If you want to hold your cards in cash in style like me, check the cards to visit Ridge and use my code YouTube10 at checkout to receive a 10% discount on your order and help support my channel. Thank you so much, Ridge, and now it's time to move into Aragon's civil service. From the 1850s, RMSP passenger liners had served a regular route between Britain and the River Plate ports in South America. They sailed from Southampton in southern England, called at the islands of Madeira and Tenerife off of the West African coast, at Pernambuco, Salvador de Bahia, and Rio de Janeiro on the coast of Brazil, and then at Montevideo in Uruguay before completing their voyage at Buenos Aires in Argentina. Aragon and her sisters modernized RMSP's Southampton to River Plate service, replacing vessels like RMS Atrato that had been serving from 1889 onwards. The A-series ships hugely increased the profitability of the route. In 1906, Aragon made 4 voyages to and from South America and netted a total profit of £45,368. In 1908, she ran aground off the Isle of Wight, but that aside, her civilian service was uneventful and reliable. By 1913, Aragon was equipped for wireless telegraphy, operating on the 300 and 600 meter wavelengths. This is where her call sign of MBN came in handy. From the turn of the century onward, growing tensions between Europe's great powers included an Anglo-German naval arms race that threatened the security of merchant shipping. From 1911, British intelligence became aware that the German Empire was secretly arming some of its passenger ships, and the UK government and British Admiralty discussed how to respond. Toward the end of 1912, the Admiralty decided to match the German policy by arming some British passenger liners, starting with RMS Aragon. She was due to carry naval guns from December 1912, but within the British government and Admiralty there was uneasiness as to how foreign countries and ports would react to this. In January 1913, Rear Admiral Henry Campbell recommended that the Admiralty should send a merchant ship to sea with naval guns, but without ammo, to test foreign governments' reactions. A meeting chaired by Sir Francis Hopwood, Civil Lord of the Admiralty, agreed, and Sir Eyre Crowe recorded, quote, "If nothing happens, it may be possible and easy, after a time, to place ammunition on board." On April 25, 1913, Aragon left Southampton as Britain's first defensively armed merchant ship, or DAMS, carrying 2 QF 4.7-inch naval guns on her stern. Governments, newspapers, and the public in South American countries that Aragon visited took little notice and expressed no concern, shrugging it off. However, on the home shores of Great Britain, there was criticism made by some serving and retired naval figures. However, the policy continued. Aragon's sister ship Amazon was made the next DAMS, and in the following months more of the A-series liners were armed. They included Alcantara, which served in World War I as an armed merchant cruiser. World War I began on July 28, 1914, and Aragon was requisitioned as a troopship, becoming HMT Aragon. HMT stands for His Majesty's Troopship. She took part in the Gallipoli campaign, in which one source states that she began by taking the 5th Battalion, the Hampshire Regiment, and Royal Army Medical Corps units to the campaign in March of 1915. As the landings were not until April 25th, this may refer to troops moving from the UK to the Eastern Mediterranean in preparation for the landings. Her duties included evacuating nearly 1,500 wounded personnel to Alexandria and Malta. On April 8th, Aragon was in Alexandria, Egypt, where she embarked the 4th Battalion, the Worcestershire Regiment, and the 2nd Battalion, the Hampshire Regiment. Both battalions were units of the 88th Brigade, which as part of the 29th Division had been ordered to take part in the Gallipoli landings. On April 11th, she left Alexandria for the Aegean island of Lemnos, where French and British ships were assembling in the large natural harbor Modros in final preparation for the landings. On April 13, 1915, Aragon's troops transferred to the cargo steamer SS River Clyde to prepare for the landing at Cape Helles 10 days later. Later in the Gallipoli campaign, a British Forces post office, Base Army Post Office Y, transferred from Arcadian to Aragon. Bapo Y later redeployed from Aragon to a land base at Modros. The invasion at Gallipoli was a costly failure, and in January of 1916, French and British forces withdrew from the Gallipoli Peninsula. On February 13th, Aragon left Modros for Malta, taking troops on leave including 4 officers and 270 men of the 63rd Royal Naval Division. On May 14, 1916, Aragon was again at Modros to withdraw troops, this time including the 1st Battalion of the Royal Marines and elements of the 2nd Royal Naval Brigade. She reached Marseille in southern France at 6:30 a.m. on May 19th. Later in 1916, Aragon served in the Indian Ocean. In December of that year, she sailed from Kilidini Harbor in the British East Africa Protectorate, reaching Durban on Christmas Day. So far, her military career had gone off without a hitch. And our members help this channel run smoothly. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Now it's time to get into HMT Aragon's final voyage. Late in 1917, Aragon spent 2 weeks at anchor off Marseille before receiving orders in December to sail for Egypt. She took about 2,200 troops to reinforce the Egyptian expeditionary force in the Palestine campaign against the Ottoman Empire, plus about 150 military officers, 160 voluntary aid detachments, and 2,500 bags of Christmas mail. She herself was serviced by a crew of 200 during the Gallipoli campaign, so we can assume she had about that many aboard at this time. She and another transport, the Nile, then sailed in convoy with an escort of destroyers for Egypt. On December 23, 1917, they reached Windy Bay, Malta, where the 2 transports stayed at anchor for 4 or 5 days. There they celebrated Christmas, and according to one VAD, those aboard Aragon had a, quote, top hole time. Aragon and Nile then continued to Egypt with a fresh escort, the Acheron-class destroyer HMS Attack, plus 2 Imperial Japanese Navy destroyers. In World War I, the British had requested the aid of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the Mediterranean due to unrestricted submarine warfare by the Imperial German Navy, and the IJN obliged. The convoy weathered a gale, and off the Egyptian coast at daybreak on Sunday, December 30th, it divided. The 2 Japanese destroyers escorted Nile to Port Said, while Attack escorted Aragon to Alexandria. On approach to the port, Attack zigzagged ahead to search the channel for mines while Aragon waited in Alexandria roads. While waiting for Attack to return, the armed trawler HMT Points Castle approached Aragon flying the international flag signal, "Follow me." The troop ship followed until Attack returned and signaled, "You have no right to take orders from a trawler." The destroyer intercepted Points Castle and then ordered Aragon to return to sea. The ship did as she was told, turning back into the sea. The most senior of Aragon's surviving officers tried to make sense of the confusion. Quote, "The only explanation that the writer can put forward is that the commander of the Attack had a warning of mines in the channel, causing him to order Aragon to disregard Points Castle's 'Follow me.' Evidently, the enemy laid mines at the appropriate time in the knowledge that the ship would be kept out and thus present a target for torpedo attack." Aragon and Attack were in Alexandria roads about 8 miles or 10 miles outside the port, awaiting permission to enter, when at about 11 a.m., the German Type UC-2 submarine SMUC-34 torpedoed Aragon, hitting her port side aft and causing extensive damage in her almost empty No. 4 hold. Aragon's deck officer of the watch, Lieutenant J.F.A. Thompson, stated she then listed to starboard. Immediately, Attack and Points Castle came to the rescue. One account states that 2 trawlers were present. The VADs were ordered into the first lifeboats to be launched, being that they were civilian volunteers. 2 or 3 of the VADs protested at being given priority, and one pleaded, quote, "Let us take our chance with the Tommies," before they all obeyed orders. Tommies, or Tommy Atkins, is slang for a common soldier in the British Army, primarily associated with the First World War. The VAD's boats rescued some troops from the water and then transferred their survivors to one or two trawlers. Aragon released her life rafts, but the explosion smashed one of her lifeboats, and her increasing list made launching the remainder impossible. Aragon's crew bravely worked until they were waist-deep in water to launch what boats they could. Attack went right alongside Aragon to take survivors aboard as quickly as possible, helped by lines cast between the two ships. Aragon sank rapidly by her stern. More than one survivor stated that soldiers waiting on deck to be rescued started singing. One said, quote, "I have heard the chorus 'Keep the Home Fires Burning' on many occasions, but I don't think that I have ever heard it given with so much power." That must have been a very moving and saddening sight to witness. By now, there was an increasing number of men in the water, and Trooper James Werner Magnuson of the New Zealand Mounted Rifles noticed an injured soldier struggling in the very rough seas. He dived overboard from the ship, rescued the man, and placed him in a lifeboat. After this, he returned aboard Aragon, rejoined his unit, and went down with the ship. He was posthumously awarded the Albert Medal for his bravery. The fact such men have walked and do walk amongst us gives me hope for the future. A draft of 3rd Reserve Battalion, Buffs East Kent Regiment, sent to reinforce the 10th Royal East Kent and West Kent Yeomanry Battalion Buffs, won high praise for its discipline. First, Lance Sergeant Canfor, already injured himself from the explosion, called the roll. Then men were detailed to cut away the life rafts while the rest sang. When the rafts were launched, Lance Corporal Baker volunteered to jump into the water to secure a life raft that was floating away, assuring the safety of about 20 men. The rest of the draft then entered the water and clung onto rafts for 2.5 hours, singing and cheering on the rescue efforts. Only one man of the draft was lost. Total badassery right there. About 15 minutes after the torpedo struck Aragon, her master, Captain Bateman, gave the order from her bridge. Every man for himself. This means it doesn't matter who you are dismissed from your post, and you should get off the ship by any means necessary. Those remaining aboard rushed to get over her side, and her bow rose out of the sea as soldiers swarmed down her side into the water. One of the VADs who survived later recorded, quote, "We felt that all our friends were drowning before our eyes." About 17 to 20 minutes after being hit, Aragon sank, and she suffered a second explosion as the cold seawater reached her hot boilers. Some of her boats were left upturned in the water. HMS Attack was now crowded with 300 to 400 survivors. Some were naked, some were wounded, many unconscious and dying. One soldier, Sergeant Harold Riddlesworth of the Cheshire Regiment, repeatedly dived from the destroyer into the sea to rescue more survivors. He survived and received the Meritorious Service Medal for his efforts. As if this day couldn't get any worse, a torpedo struck Attack amidships and blew her into 2 pieces, both of which sank within 5 to 7 minutes. The explosion ruptured Attack's bunkers, spilling tons of thick, black bunker fuel oil into the sea as she sank. Hundreds of men were launched back into the water, and many of them became covered in oil or overwhelmed by the fumes. Aragon's surviving lifeboats now ferried hundreds of survivors to the trawlers, where the VADs, quote, worked unceasingly and with great heroism to tend to the many wounded. Other trawlers came to assist, and the first trawler or trawlers returned to harbor for safety reasons. Of the more than 2,200 aboard Aragon, 600 were killed as well as 10 from Attack, including Captain Bateman, 19 of his crew, and 6 of the VADs. Hundreds of troops were killed. One of these troops was Ernest Horlock, a Royal Field Artillery Battery Sergeant Major who had received the Victoria Cross for conspicuous gallantry shown on the Western Front in 1914. Another lost was Private Fred J. Barnes, an Essex Regiment soldier who had worked as a songwriter prior to the war. And yet another was 22-year-old Airman 2nd Class Alfred Moore from Lower Edmonton, London. Another 25 of those killed were new recruits to the 5th Battalion, the Bedfordshire Regiment. Soldiers killed in the sinking are among those commemorated by the Chatby Memorial in the Chatby district of eastern Alexandria. Rest in peace to all of those lost in this horrific tragedy, and I thank them for their service. Aragon's second officer survived. A month later, he told the master of an Australian troopship, the converted AUSNC liner HMAT Indara, that as Aragon was sinking, a furious Captain Bateman shouted from her bridge to Attack's commander that he would be demanding an inquiry into his ship having been ordered out of port. Bateman then jumped overboard and was never seen again. I agree with the man. I too would love to know why they were ordered away from port. Many of the survivors from Aragon's crew were repatriated to England, reaching Southampton on February 10, 1918. Some voyaged all the way by steamship, but the majority traveled over land, which is understandable. Aragon remains a wreck off the Egyptian coast, lying about 130 feet of water, beside HMS Attack at 31 degrees 18 minutes north, 29 degrees 49 minutes east. War is ugly, and unfortunately, Aragon faced the full brute force of this. World War I was just the beginning, as World War II would up the ante, and the great Imperial Japanese battleship Yamashiro prowled the Pacific with the Imperial Japanese Navy, up until her loss at the Battle of the Siergao Strait. Stay tuned for next week's episode of Shipwreck Sunday for her entire story.